Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello everyone, welcome to the course An Introduction to Disability Studies. In this coming lecture, which is lecture number 4, I am going to talk about stereotypes and stigma. So, before I get into stereotype and stigma, let me give a overview what we discussed in lecture number 3. So, in the lecture number 3, we were talking about norms, discourse of norms and disability, and I spoke very clearly and explicitly that how norms are related to disability, how norms play a very important role in the constitution of disability, right. So, in fact, as you remember, Tom Shakespeare says that this oval of a dustbin was said to disability, which means to say that everything that is not acceptable you throw on the dustbin. So, everything in the society which is not acceptable goes and assigned with disability, oh something is disabled. So, right. So, when something is disability, which means to say that this is not part of our society. So, throw it, reject it, never accept it. I also talked about that how norms vary from one culture to the another. For example, I was talking about, let us say, for greeting in particular community, handshaking is a practice, but if you go to another culture, there is another practice which go for greeting. So, which means to say that in every culture, the moment you vary, you go from one culture to another, the idea of a norm differ, right. It is not going to be the same. In the same way, in fact, I also added a point by saying that in every culture, it evolves, and what is acceptable today was not acceptable in certain era. So, which means to say that there was a time when it was accepted, not accepted, now it is accepted. So, even the culture evolves, society evolves, and what was abnormal in a particular time period is no more abnormal in today's time period, right. So, that is how it goes. And also I talked about Foucault, I also talked about Leonard J. Davis, right, and most importantly Goffman and Habermas, and how they are extremely influential in reading disability studies. Without their reading, without their understanding, it is difficult to understand. So, I divided entire my chapter in certain segments just to give you an idea that why the discourse of norms are very, very important and significant to understand the discourse of disability. All right. So, that was an overview of lecture number 3. In lecture number 4, titled as Stereotypes and Stigma, I am going to speak about that what is a stigma, right. In fact, in the introduction I have already told you the name of a person, right, who has written a book, A Stigma, right. Find this out and read. I have also asked you to read, because I was already had planned that I am going to speak about on this chapter. So, the point is this, that what is a stereotype, all right. I will highlight all the important points related to the stereotypes and also the stigma. But one thing before I move in this lecture, or the slide number 1, before I move, let me make you this point. First, is a stereotype good or bad? That is the first question, right. The point is that there are certain stereotypes which are good, and there are certain stereotypes which are bad, all right. Let us say, for example, if Germany is associated with always a football, right. So, what happens? It is accepted, it is considered as a glorifying image of a Germany through football. That is also a kind of a stereotype, but people celebrate, people enjoy being associated with that particular way of stereotyping. In another stereotyping, which is a negative image, let us say for example that, oh, it is a woman, which means to say this has to go for mothering, or she has to go for nurturing. This is also stereotyping a woman, that she cannot do this, she can do this. This is a negative stereotyping. So, stereotyping is also in one way or another very controlling, right, very restricting the potentiality of a person, or I would say that stereotyping is a way through which we live in our society. There is every society, it's not like it's only, but like it's not only available in one society. Every society, if there is a society, there is a stereotyping. The second question is that why I have put stigma and stereotyping together. The reason is that due to stereotyping, stigma emerges, right. So, let us say for example, when there is a body suffering or having some kind of a problem or disease, let us say HIV, AIDS, right. So, then immediately there is a stereotyping that so and so would have been the reason for one falling into that particular disease, right. But then there is a stigma comes over there, right. So, in this chapter I am going to talk extensively about these two so that we can understand. In fact, most of the books written explore about stereotypes and stigma, but even if we are reading this book or any book, or let us say when we are engaging with disability studies, it is our job to go deeper and understand that where is stereotyping emerging. In fact, most of the movies I was talking about in lecture number 1, that how disability is portrayed in movies, cinema, magazines, so on and so forth. In the same way, when you are watching a cinema, when you are watching a film or Netflix series or any series or any particular magazine, closely observe that whether something is stereotypes or stigmatized or not, right. That is what a keen insight of a disability scholar is. Alright, so let us move to the slide number 1. We are accurately aware of the perception that sets us apart from others, extending well beyond the realities of our disability. We face a spectrum of misconception and unwelcoming reactions rooted in these assumptions. We are unfairly labeled as visual appealing, helpless, pitiful, overly dependent, extensively independent, courageous, bitter, intellectually deficient, possessing supernatural abilities and more. The contradictory nature of these stereotypes highlight their irrationalities, right. So, what is this point is talking about? That is the first concern, right. This is talking about that someone is constantly shown dependent, someone is constantly shown pitiable, someone is constantly shown weaker, someone is constantly shown deprived, someone is constantly shown that they cannot do this. So, when this repeatedly image is being circulated, what happens in our popular imagination, in our mind, it is feeded, it is imbibed, and what we do, we always think that, oh, this particular kind of a person is deprived of something, this is a weak, he is a weak or she is a weak. So, this is, you see, there is no natural connection, there is no rationality, but what happens? The constant circulation of that images in our mind made it natural. So, the moment we encounter that section or that those kind of a people or those kind of a bodies, we constantly expect that, oh, this is we feel pitiable. Where does it come from? This is what I say stereotyping. This is what I say that is producing the images of stereotypical images for us, right. So, therefore, there is no rationality over this, but what happens, the constant circulation of those image circulating, not being resisted, not being questioned, right. You remember I was also talking about that till 1990s, 200, 2010, you go and watch any movies, you will see first that people with disabilities are not projected or not represented. If you see they are represented as a metaphor, right, to serve the purpose of the movies. Second, they are not given a prominent role in those movies, and third, the particular objective of presenting them is to show them how pitiable, inferior and poor they are. So what happens, this is the kind of image is circulated. This is the slowly and gradually is inbuilt in our mind, and we constantly think about disabled people in the same way as it has been shown to us from our childhood days. However, there is a possibility that picture may be different, right? Let me give you an example so that you can understand in a better way. The moment you see a particular athlete, right, doing something so-called extraordinary job, you are amazed. Why are you amazed? Because you are not expecting that kind of a performance from that disabled athlete. It is only imagined or it has been only expected from a particular abled bodies, and the moment it happens, you are amazed because you are not expecting, you have never been told, you have never seen this, and that is why it happens to you. That is why you are amazed, you are shocked or surprised. This surprise, this shock is a result of a particular body being stereotyped. That is what exactly the point I am making for us, right? So this is what we need to understand. The reaction, I will talk about it in a forthcoming lecture, where this reaction comes from. The reaction is a result that this is not what you are expecting, right? Let us move to the next point. Stereotypical beliefs often become self-fulfilling prophecies, shaping individuals with disabilities into the roles that justify the initial treatment they receive. This phenomena is particularly pronounced among those in institutional care where their capacity to redefine their role is limited. For instance, if a child is perceived as a helpless and consequently treated as such, having every task done for her, she may lack the opportunity to cultivate independence and could become institutionally dependent. Similarly, an individual labeled as unintelligent may receive minimal intellectual stimulation without the means to seek it out independently. They may become conditioned into a state of intellectual passivity. So many thinkers and scholars have addressed the concept of stereotypes from various perspectives. Some notable figures include, so what I am going to do this now, I am going to give you a picture of a thinkers who have talked about it, who have discussed it. And first thing, stereotyping is not something that has been emerging or that is new phenomena. No, that is not true. Since the society existed, I mean that is a very powerful claim I am making, but let me make this because that is what my understanding is about. Since the society existed, stereotypes existed, right, in some way or other way, but it is not that it has been remained same. It is not like what was in 16th century is going to be the same in 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, 21st, no. It is changes because as the society evolves, as you challenge, as you question, then new stereotypes come into the picture. So our job is to constantly engage with it. Our job is to constantly contest with it. Our job is not to let this stereotype go unchecked. That is important. Not to let any stereotypes go unchecked. That is the point. So because stereotyping, as I am constantly saying, stereotyping is related, is associated with stigma. So therefore, our job is to constantly scrutinize, look at the faults and how it has been come into the picture. But second question is also come into a place. As a researcher, we need to look at the both sides. What is the second question? The second question is, does stereotype not hold any sense of facts or objectivity or truth? All right, that is the question. The question is, so all the stereotypes are false? Is that stereotypes are based on only on the assumptions of a person or a particular people, subset of people? I would say no. There is a certain sense of a truth, but on the name of a one like truth, you should not apply and homogenize, as I have been constantly arguing that we should not homogenize and hegemonize. You should not make the image of the entire community about the same. For example, India was considered as a country of snake charmers, right. So, I am talking about, because I am going to speak about the French finance, so I am just looking at the colonial discourse just to explain this to you. So, India was constantly thought by the Britishers, or let us say the West, that is a country of the poor people, it's only snake charmers, so on and so forth. I didn't Macaulay's minute, I don't want to get into details, but it will take a lot of time, but I would suggest you please read Macaulay's minute as well, because Macaulay's minute is nothing but based on stereotypes and biases. Okay. So, the point is this, that snake no, that is not true. There are people who play with the snakes, but there are people who also play with the math, play with the science, play with the yoga. There are many more things happening in the same country. But what happens to put the country down, to produce the image of a country as inferior in terms of a development, I do not know what development means, but let me put it this way, that they were constantly pushed back. But the problem happened when you picked up one image from a one section and blanket it on everyone equally. You say that everyone is the same. So, what about the other truth that exists? You just picked up one idea and you projected as if that is the only thing about a particular country. In the same way, you picked up one idea about a particular section or a gender and you put it that it is equally applicable on every person who belong to that gender. That is the objection, all right. Second thing is, let us not stop here. The second thing is, why is it so? Why that it is happening? What is the reason behind it? Third questions, what is wrong with it? Why do we ridicule if a person is playing with the snakes? Is because it is not normal. That is why I put lecture number 3rd first and lecture number 4th, which is talking about stigma and stereotypes, later after norms, because it is directly related. It is not desirable. You do not expect a person to play with the snakes, but that is a very anthropomorphic, right, anthropocentric approach to think about it. But my contestation is that these are a problem and these are the question that we need to pose so that we can reach to a better conclusion, to a better understanding, to understand what is happening in us, with us, for us, in our society. Why is it so that for everything we have to look at the best and put on us or standards, or let us say behaviors or parameters, right, to judge a person that whether it is a good or bad is taken from the West. And if you do not apply, I am sure that you know about the beauty standard, right, it is taken from the West and comes to India, and that is how it goes on. So, let us think about it deeply. Hold on for a second, pause the video for a second and think about it, what I am speaking, so that you can sediment your discourse, right? You can sediment your thought and relate with it before we move to the Frantz Fanon. So, Frantz Fanon is a person who is considered to be the very important post-colonial thinker. I am sure that you all must have heard the name of Frantz Fanon. Frantz Fanon's a very important book is Black Skin, White Mask, right? So, look at this screen. Frantz Fanon, in his seminal work Black Skin and White Mask, explored the psychological effects of colonization and racism on individuals of color. He discusses how stereotypes, particularly those related to race, can shape one's self-perception and identity. Fanon argues that the colonized subject internalizes the stereotypes imposed by the colonizer, leading to, that is a very important, fractured sense of self and a desire to conform to the dominant culture's ideals. He emphasizes the dehumanizing impact of racial stereotypes and struggle for liberation from the influence. See, why I am speaking about the Frantz Fanon? See, Frantz Fanon is important because he is giving a theory. he is giving an idea to us. He is giving a point which we can borrow and apply in our discourses. He is talking about that how stereotyping is so dehumanizing, all right. Stereotyping is not a simply stereotype, it is dehumanizing. It is making a person feel very inferior, it produces a very fractured sense of a self. So, that is a problematic. So, racial inferior, you see that a particular race, the moment you look at a particular race, there is a stereotyping about that race. Oh, he is not so good, he cannot do this, right. Like in fact, I am very astonished with the fact when I listen these stereotypes that girls are not good at maths. What is this stereotyping, right? And that is why, I mean, people say that is why you can see in the IITs the number of girls are not more in comparison to the boys, and that is why there is a reservation for the girls, so that girls can be promoted into IITs. See, my question is this: there is a stereotype about the girl that they are not good at maths, only boys are good at maths. This is a what? This is a very dehumanizing. The moment you look at the women, you think, oh, they are more into the art or the beauty, so on and so forth, right. So, this is what I am just giving you a simple example that you can, so that you can relate, so that you can understand the point that I am making, that this is a very dehumanizing. This produces a very fractured sense of a self, and most importantly, it does not hold it here, it goes one step ahead. Even the person starts looking himself or herself with the other's eye. Stereotyping is so effective, so impactful, that even you start looking at yourself as if you are like this. The labeling that is given to you, right, the labeling that has been assigned to you, you start thinking that, oh yeah, that is true about me, oh really, I cannot do this. So, you do not question it anymore, right. This is what it is saying, that self-perception and identity, right, it is about damaging someone's identity, and at the same time producing the same identity, and even the person has to fight with the identity produced for him or her. So, this is what Frantz Fanon is arguing in a Black Skin and White Mask. So, our job is to look at this idea and discourses, and coming to the disabled point, so that you can relate why I am speaking about Frantz Fanon. I am speaking about the Frantz Fanon because that is the same equally applicable on the name of disability. So, people with disability is also dehumanizing. You look at with a very sympathetic look, oh, he cannot do this, he is so deprived, how does he look at himself, and slowly and gradually, it is not only that his identity is fractured, right, but it is also his sense of self is fractured, and that is where we need to hold on, we need to question, we need to argue, we need to contest, we need to engage, we need to scrutinize, most importantly as a student, as a researcher, right. So, this is why stereotyping can be go to that extent. The second person who is extremely significant is Stuart Hall, right. As we all know, in the field called cultural studies, Stuart Hall is extremely very important figure, all right. So, I would say that he has written many articles and many books, but please before we move further, I would say that just hold on, pause the video for a second and go back and see the kind of a book that he has written, what is his major ideas is about, what he is talking about, his, like in fact, look at his discourse of representation, because that is where he is saying that how through the representation someone's image is being stereotyped, right, because representation play a very significant and important role in stereotyping, in producing someone's image, right. So, Stuart Hall is a very important cultural thinker. Let us see what he has to say about stereotypes, all right. So, look at the point on the slides. Here you see Stuart Hall's contribution to cultural studies and media analysis have focused extensively on representation and stereotype in mass communication. He examines, what he examines? How stereotypes are constructed, disseminated and perpetuated through various media channels, including television, film and advertising. Hall's work highlights the power dynamics inherent, look at this idea, that is what I have been focusing on, power dynamics inherent in the production of stereotypes, as well as their role of what? Production of stereotype in shaping public perception and reinforcing existing social hierarchies, right. I mean, I tell you this, Stuart Hall is so powerful, so significant that each of his work, each of his words, each of his sentences speaks voluminously, right. What is saying? He is saying that there is a film, media, television in which these are the medium through which disability is being produced, right, or stereotypes are being produced. This is what we have discussed. Like for example, if you go to the, I have never come across any magazines where I see any disabled figure's image on the front page. So far, obviously, I have not seen. If you have come across, I will be happy to see. In fact, even if it has done, let us say for example, let us not say that it has never been done, but even if it has done, I am pretty sure that it is a very, very rare, right, hardly very few. Why? Right. So, that is the one question that I have been highlighting it. Second, you see this, these are the representation through which it has been produced, right, the stereotypes are produced. Second is the question that I am raising, what Stuart Hall is saying, is a power dynamics. What is the power dynamics? Well, like, it is not neutral that, oh, this happened, I was not conscious about it, I was not aware about it, it just happened. No, there is a power dynamics, as I have been saying. No one wants to question the status quo, right. Let me write it for you. Status quo, which means everyone wants to remain where they are. Like, people are so scared to challenge the status quo, because they think that the moment you challenge the status quo, there would be anarchy. Trust me, these are propaganda so that a certain section of people can remain inferior. They should not get privileges, they should not get, forget about the privileges, they should not get rights, and keep serving to the upper class or the people who are affluent or who are in the position of ruling the power. So, this is why it says that to maintain the hierarchy, there is a production of stereotypes, right. You constantly produce that stereotype so that the hierarchies can remain intact. Like, the ruling class keep ruling and the serving class keep serving, right. So, this is what Stuart Hall is saying, that it helps in shaping our public perception, right, our perceptions, not only yours and mine, it is about the entire public's perception can be shaped. So that what it does, if something you question, something you say, people think there is something wrong with you, because already people's perception has been shaped by media images, where they have already understood that this particular section or this particular kind of a body holds this kind of image, or they are like that. So, if you question, people are not going to accept it, even if it is not true. So, you understand this very simple analogy. So, the analogy what I am giving it to say that already people have decided that how you are, who you are, how you should look like, and the moment you challenge that, no one is going to accept that, right. So, what I mean to say that stereotypes are produced constantly so that public perception can be maintained, so that public can believe this. So, this is the entire political power dynamics channel that plays a very important idea in producing all this, all right. So, this is why I was saying that Stuart Hall is extremely important to know what he, to know disability studies more vehementally, or understanding that how it moves around, right. Let me move to the next one, is very, very significant person called Judith Butler, right. I am pretty sure that there is no discourse of the body, not only about the gender, right. People think that Judith Butler is only significant when we are talking about feminist discourse or gender. No, that's not true. That's any body discourse is not possible without Judith Butler. In fact, entire discourse, if we are dealing with engaging with the culture studies, disability studies, minority studies, Butler play a very important role. There are 2 books written by her. I am just writing the name of those books for you. If you get time, do read. The first one is Gender Trouble. I am sure you all know, right? And the second one is Bodies That Matter, right? So, I mean, if you cannot read the entire book, if you do not have time, I would suggest you read the entire book, but please read the introduction of this book, Bodies That Matter and Gender Trouble, right. So, these are 2 very significant book written by Butler. What is Butler has to say about it? Butler's gender theory challenges conventional understanding of identity, emphasizing its performative nature. She argues that gender is not an inherent trait, right, but rather a set of behavior and expression. I would say same, that disability is not an inherent trait, but same, a set of behavior and expression, okay, that are continually performed and reinforced through social interactions. Stereotypes, now what she has to say about the stereotypes? Stereotypes play a significant role in this performance as they prescribe and regulate acceptable forms of gender expression. Butler critiques the restrictive nature of stereotypes, advocating for a more fluid and expansive understanding of gender identity. So, what Butler is important for? Just I have given you a sense that why we need to read Butler to understand the idea of stereotypes. Butler talks about that gender is not an inherent trait. It is not like you are born with that particular gender. In the same way, I said it is not like you are born with a disability, but there is a rather set of behavior and expression. So, which means to say that there is a behavior which you perform, right. Let me give you a very easy way to make you understand. Imagine there is a man, right, who is walking on the road, but his dress is generally not what the men wear, but what women wear. Let us say for example, sari and blouse, right. And if suppose he or she, he has a long hair and slightly his walk is not masculine, but a feminine. If you are following or if you are going on the same road and if you see her or him, like see, I am saying her because I am also automatically trained to think in that directions, right. So, if you see him, are you going to identify him as a man or a woman? You are going to see he is a woman. So, here you see you are confused. So, what makes a woman is not her sex, it is more about her gender, which means to say that the kind of attitudes, kind of appearance, kind of a walk, a kind of a dress code she is carrying forward, and that is what Butler says, that continually performed, right, this behavior and expression, and she remains a woman or one remain women because she constantly perform that behavior, right. The moment a woman start challenging that, the binary will be questioned, right. In the same way is about disabled men or disabled women, all right. So, this is a very clear notion. What is talking about is through the performances you become disabled through a particular performance. I am sure that let me give you a very colloquial way of humiliation that people do. Suppose if you are not able to see something, right, and what the other person says derogatory, ki, are you a blind, right. What do you mean to say? That it is only blind who can see, and you see that is a derogatory remarks associated with a people with visually impaired attached to you, because you are now also performing the same thing, right. So, this is what you see how humiliating what I was talking about, dehumanizing for people with disabilities. All right. So, this is what Butler is, and as I said, please read it. Let us move to the next one, who is again extremely influential in colonial studies and post-colonial studies, called Edward Said. Everyone has heard the name of Edward Said, but the problem is that everyone read Edward Said so that they can understand the discourse of Orientalism or crisis in Orientalism, right. But Edward Said kind of people are not only limited to post-colonial studies, they are also helpful in thinking about disability or disability studies, right. So, let us say what Edward Said has to do. Edward Said is saying, look at the slide please. Edward Said's a concept of Orientalism examines the ways in which Western societies have constructed and perpetuated stereotypes about the East. He argues that Orientalist discourse portray the East as exotic. Look at this stereotype. This is what I was talking about. Look at this, how they have been projected the East: exotic, backward, inferior. Why they have been projected like this? To justify Western dominance and colonial expansion, right. So, he also highlights how these stereotypes have been ingrained in Western culture, have influenced policies. Look at this, policies, influenced policies, representation and perception of the East, contributing to a distorted and dehumanizing view of its people and culture, right. So, the point what I am making, in fact Edward Said is making, he is talking about that how Orientalism produced an image of the Orient, right. And why stereotyping? As I was talking about, that stereotyping is not a very apolitical task, it is very much political. So, what it means to say that is a very being political is that through the dehumanization, right, through the stereotyping, you justify what you are doing, right. So, let us say for example, once you say that you are technologically not advanced, right, you somehow prove that you are not intellectually advanced. What happens? Now, I can prove my presence, I can justify my dominance over you because you need me, you think that this person can do better for me, right. So, this is what stereotyping does. Stereotyping justifies the oppressive act, stereotyping justifies the subjugating nature of majorities, nature of someone who is going to dominate. So, you cannot question, right, you say nice, it's doing for my interest. Second problem is that it is translated also in the policy making, right. So, when the policy makers sit, they think that, oh yeah, that is a justified, let us do like this, let me help you in this way. So, this is what it goes on to this extent that even policies are highly influenced, right. So, the perception of the East is made by people or by the Orient, was made in a certain way so that it can rule over the East, right. So, the West, so dominance over the East was justified. In the same way, like in the previous lecture, like previous means in the lecture number 2 where I was talking about terms associated with disabilities, I was talking that how ableism, right, how ableism justifies this dominance over disabled people. One tool is stereotyping, right, one tool is stereotyping. Let us move to the next slide now. Michel Foucault, right, Michel Foucault's analysis of power dynamics and discourse shed light on how stereotyping function. So, I will not talk about the Foucault in details because I have already discussed that how Foucault talks about norms and all that, and obviously so far it has been pretty clear to us that stereotyping plays a very important role in power dynamics, right, in making someone dominate over others. Rosemary Garland Thompson, who like is extremely significant, about whom I am gonna speak very often, all right. So, let's move to Leonard J. Davis. I have already spoken about it. I am just giving you a sense of slides so that you can read more on it. And Susan Wendell, also a very significant person who is helpful in thinking about disabilities, right. So, now coming to the Paul Longmore. Why? Because here I am going to establish the connection between stereotypes and stigma. Okay. So, Longmore's work emphasizes the importance of challenging stereotypes and advocating for the rights and dignity of disabled people. He critiques the narrative of disability as a tragedy or inspiration, arguing that such portrayals diminish the agency and humanity of disabled individuals. Longmore highlights the diversity of disabled experiences and the need for inclusive representation in both academic discourse and popular culture. He advocates for a social model of disability that focuses on removing barriers and promoting equality and empowerment. Now, let us come to what he has to say about stereotypes and stigma, right. Stereotypes and stigma surrounding disability persist as a significant barrier to inclusion and equality in society. These misconceptions often stem from lack of understanding and perpetuate harmful attitudes and behavior toward individuals with disabilities. One common stereotype is the assumption that people with disabilities are unable to contribute meaningfully to society or lead fulfilling lives. These stereotypes overlook the diverse abilities and talents within the disabled communities and undermines opportunity for full participation and integration. Most of the time what happens is stigma associated with disability can lead to social exclusion, discrimination, unequal access to education, employment and health care. People with disabilities may face prejudice and discrimination in various forms and outright exclusion from certain spaces and opportunities, right. So, let's just read this slides, then I would explain to you what I mean by this, right. The stigma denoted the physical mark such as tattoos or burns inflicted upon criminals or slaves, serving as a visible indicator of their marginalized status or perceived deviance. So, this is what C.P. Jones has to say. And then when we come to the 18th century concept of stigma, it is expanded to compass signs of illness or physical deterioration. In the 20th century, look at this how in different centuries things are changing. It broadened further to encompass both physical and symbolical identifier of social deviance or disapproval. In contemporary usage, stigma no longer implies inherent moral flaws within a specific individual or groups, but rather refers to a socio-cultural process through which marginalized groups are labeled by others as abnormal, shameful, undesirable. The issue of stigma lies not with the individual bearing the mark, but rather within the community that stigmatize them, right. So, before I go into what Goffman has to say about the stigma, right. Here what I was trying to establish the connection that stereotypes has directly related, it is a directly concern with stigma. What happened? What is a stigma, right? Let me give you an example of a person who has a HIV AIDS, right? It is a very most significant concern that India was talking about. During that time, and like even today, a person who has HIV AIDS, how he has looked, one is something that he is a morally flawed person. Understand this, that disease is not just a disease which is a medically scrutinized. It is also that society is going to scrutinize that particular person, thinking that he has done something not acceptable in our society, which means he is a sexually deviant person, which means he is a morally corrupt. So, this is a stigma. This is a stigma attached to a body who has AIDS. Now, stigma is so dehumanizing that a person forgets the pain that he goes through in this particular disease, but rather he has to overcome, he has to first understand and let the people understand that it is not about his character. The disease is not about his character, it's more about that how it is affecting his body. But the people think that he is a stigmatized body and people do not accept that, and that is, my dear students and friends, that is more painful than anything else, right? And this is why today we are talking and engaging about this, because stigma is something which is not only dehumanizes you, right? In fact, it goes to one step ahead. It makes your life unworthy of living, right? It forces you to commit suicide, and that is why we need to take this very seriously, right? So the point what I am making in this lecture is this, that stereotypes lead to stigma, and stigmatized body is more problematic for the society, and society is not the problem with the body. It is because the society keeps pushing that body in the margin, in the background, so that this body can be understood as morally incorruptible. In the same way that happens also with the disabled body, right? The stigma is associated. What is the stigma in today's society is this, that something you have done wrong and that is why you are born as a disabled, right? So what happens? You keep looking as yourself as stigmatized, and you think that there is something not wrong with the society, but there is something wrong with you, and that's a problematic. All right. So let's go to say what Erving Goffman has to say about stigma. All right. And before I move to the slides, one important book, as I have been constantly requesting you to read, is Stigma: Notes on the Management of Spoiled Identity. All right. Let's look at the slides. Here it goes that it is a seminal work that explored the social dynamics of stigma and its impact on individual lives. In this book, Goffman examines how stigmatized individuals navigate social interaction, manage their identity, and cope with the consequence of being marked as different or deviant in the eyes of society. Through detailed analysis and vivid examples, Goffman sheds light on the strategies people employ to conceal or mitigate the effect of stigma, highlighting the complex interplay between social norms, power dynamics, and personal identity. So if you read these books in details, you can understand the ways, because for me it's not possible to give the entire book in one lecture. So social stigma as a mark of a disgrace or discredit that sets a person apart from others, leading to their de-evaluation in the eyes of society. Stigmatized individuals are often seen as deviating from social norms or expectations, which can result in discrimination, prejudice, and social exclusion. Right. So what are the types of stigma? The first is abomination of the body. These stigmas are associated with physical attributes that deviate from the societal norms, such as physical disability, deformities, or disfigurement. Blemishes of individual character. These stigma stems from perceived flaws in an individual's character or behavior, such as mental illness, criminal history, or substance abuse. And then we have a tribal stigma. These stigmas are based on the membership in particular social groups, such as race, nationality, religion, ethnicity, or often involve prejudices and stereotypes associated with these groups. So point what is making in this book, like what is making in this book by Goffman, is this, that if you are suffering from a stigma, what do? You try to constantly put pressure on yourself or on your family so that you can come out of that stigma. Let me give an example. For example, a person who is born in a lower caste, right? what he does, he constantly try to come out of that caste category. So that is why M.N. Srinivas is a famous sociologist, as you all know, has done a very great study, and in that study he is talking about that how people are hiding their surname. In fact, there are, I am sure that you can notice in our society that people want to come out of that stigma, caste stigma basically I am talking about, and they use the surname of the upper caste so that they will be not looked down upon as a lower caste, right. So the point here I am making is that stigma is so effective and effective as well that you constantly try to come out of it. There are many other ways through which you do. Let us say for example, a person, I am just giving an example, who is black, right. In our society, unfortunately, there is a constantly pressure to look fair and white. White means blonde, right, because that is how we are following the West. So the problem what happens when you are following the West, you want to look fair and you see handsome and all. So you constantly put pressure on yourself, and this is so alienating that you do not fully participate in the society. Imagine how coercive it is that because of that you are not able to fully perform your roles, because of that you are not able to fully participate in the society, and how dangerous, how problematic this is, right. So the stigma has to be questioned, it has to be debated, it has to be problematized, all right. So the point what I am making is this, that when you are looking at that someone is being stigmatized, like obviously every disabled people have been stigmatized, women are stigmatized, how we can de-stigmatize, right. So the point is, look at the slide, what I am writing is how we can de-stigmatize, right. That is where we need to focus, all right. So let us look at the stigma management now. Stigma management involves the strategies individuals employ to cope with or mitigate the effect of stigma on their lives. These may include concealing the stigmatized attributes, as I was talking about in terms of caste, right, in terms of changing the surname, seeking social support from others who share similar experiences, right. So you form a community or a group so that you can share your problem, or you think that no, I am not only one person in this society, there are other people as well. Adjusting one's behavior to minimize the impact of stigma in social interactions, right. So stigma can profoundly impact on individuals' sense of self. That is a very important, I am highlighting it again, that how stigma affect your sense of self and identity, right. So Goffman discusses the concept of a spoiled identity. Please read this book so that you can understand the discourse and the idea of spoiled identity, right, where the stigmatized attributes become central to how others perceive and interact with the individuals, overshadowing other aspects of their identity, right. So the point what I am talking about, that the kind of a pressure one is going, right, he has to conceal its identity, he has to not look like what he is or how he or she looks like. So this is a problem that is being constantly imposed, right, and most of the time it also challenges, it also dehumanizes his sense of self. He feels alienated, what Marx says in different way in terms of proletariat and conflict with bourgeois. In the same way, here also disabled body also feels alienated from his body itself, from his sense of self itself. It's so humiliating for him that he do not look at himself, he do not think as if he is a proud person of that particular society. And also one point that we need to highlight is also that look at the society's coercive measures, right. it does not even understand that a person is going through is really very effective and he is not able to fully participate in our society. His inclusion is becoming challenging in the way society is organized, and therefore, we are supposed to look that up, right. So, moving to the next slides, here we have passing and covering. Passing, what is the term called passing? It refers to the act of completing concealing one's stigmatized identity from others, often by presenting oneself as a member of the non-stigmatized group, right. This is a passing, right, where you present oneself as a member of the non-stigmatized group, you conceal your identity. And then we have a covering. Covering involves downplaying or minimizing the significance of the stigmatized attribute while still acknowledging its presence. Discredited versus discreditable stigma. Discredited stigma, what is that? It refers to attributes that are already known and visible to others, while discreditable stigma refers to attributes that are potentially conceivable and may only be revealed under certain circumstances. The strategy employed to manage stigma may vary depending on whether the stigma is discredited or discreditable. That is a very extremely significant point which I wanted to make, right. So, look at this again. What is discredited stigma? It is that is already known and visible, right, and discreditable, which means which are potentially conceivable, but can be revealed under certain circumstances, right. So, this is the very difference which we need to understand, that it also depends that whether the stigma is discredited or it is discreditable. And then we have what Goffman explores, how stigma influences the dynamics of social interaction, including impression, management, self-presentation, and the negotiation of identity within various social contexts. A stigmatized individual may face challenges in managing how others perceive them and may encounter prejudice, discrimination, and social barrier as a result. So, here the point is that there are certain power dynamics that play a very significant role, so that we can challenge that power dynamics, all right. So, the point what Goffman is making is this, that there are pressure on certain bodies who are discredited, and then there is also pressure on those bodies to conceal that identity when they are going to participate in the society, right. But in certain circumstances, absolutely it has to be revealed, right. So, these are the very subtle nuances that we know in the discourse of stigma, all right. So, but here you see that how even disabled body go through stereotyping, and that leads to stigma, right. And in everyday discourse, new kind of stigma or new kind of stereotyping is being produced. So, therefore, as a student of disability studies, we need to question that and understand this entire dynamics, most importantly power dynamics of stigma and stereotyping associated with disability. All right. So, with this I would like to end this lecture, and I hope that you have relate what I mean by stigma and stereotyping in relation to disability. But for better understanding, I would suggest you please read these books and also start examining by your own self, start questioning, take a pause, then think. Like, you are not supposed to listen the entire lecture in one go, because you will forget a lot of points. What you need to do is stop, pause, and then think, and then start it again. All right, my dear students and friends, I'll take your bye from now. See you next time, and with the new discourse which we are coming up. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye. Stay happy.